I'm going to give a quick demonstration of how to set up a game controller that will take data or variables from one scene to another. So before I get started on that, I just want to walk through the little bit of setup that I've done. I have a scene 0 and a scene 1, and each one has the same thing in it right now. There's a canvas which has a switch scene button. It has a text that's displaying the level number, and it has this health text and this experience text, both of which are not displaying any information right now. If we check out scene number 1, it's displaying scene 1 up here. It has the same button. I've set that button up as a prefab because they each do the same thing. And the way that that button works is I have created a script that's a load scene script that I can show you. So this load scene script, I've done just one thing. So I've brought in the scene management system here. I've created a public void called load next scene. The argument is an integer that is the scene number to load. And then I just call scene manager.loadScene and I pass that argument in here. So I've put that script onto my button, and in the onClick function I added something here. I clicked the little plus button. I dragged just the button to be in its own onClick function. And then because I made that function a public void, it shows up here as something that's connected to the button game object. And here's the function, load next scene. So the load scene script is showing up on my button and this load next scene function. So in scene number 0, I'm loading scene number 1. And in scene number 1, I'm switching back to scene number 0. And those numbers are here in the build settings. So I just dragged them in, both of my scenes, scene 0 and scene 1. Notice scene 0 is number 0, scene 1 is number 1. These could be named anything you want, but as you load them in, the order that they're placed into the build settings determines what number they are. So a really quick little test, if I start at scene 0, I'm in scene 0, I can click my button and it'll switch to scene 1. So I have the loading level based on a button, but you could have it based on any kind of event that you want. Now let's get our game controller started. So the way that we make a game controller is we'll need to start off with an empty game object, and we'll rename that game object game controller. We'll need to create a script that will live on this object. We'll put our game control script onto the game controller. Opening up the game control script, just make it a little smaller. We want to start off by creating a static reference to this game control script so that we can call it in other scenes and we have something that we're able to refer to it by. So we create a public static reference to this game control class. Make sure you spell it correctly. This needs to be the same name as the script. So whatever you've named your script, this needs to be the same name. And we'll refer to it by the name control. Now, we don't need either of these functions. What we do need is the awake function. So when the scene starts, we want to first check if this control object exists. So does it exist? If it does not exist, we say don't destroy this game object. and set control equal to this game object. After we've checked that, we can say, well, if control, so this is if control does not exist. If control does exist, so if control is not equal to this, it does exist already. This is else if. Then you want to destroy this one because we want to keep the old control. So if control already exists, we want to keep it. And if it does not exist, we want to set it equal to this. So we're checking if it exists already. If not, we make this control. If it does exist, we destroy this because when we want to use the old control. So this setup is called a singleton setup, and it essentially allows us to pass this game object between scenes. So now that we have a game object that will be passed around, we want to create our variables. So as you can see, we have our health and experience variables. So we'll create them here. So we have a public float health, public float experience. Now, so what I want to do is essentially when the GUI layer loads in my scene, I want to pass these variables into my text objects so that they are displayed. So if we check the on GUI script, if we're going to be using our UI functions, we want to make sure we bring them in the engine.ui. So make sure we bring these in up here. And first thing I want to do is find these game objects so that I can change their values. So I'm going to use a function called GameObject.find. And what we pass in is just the name of the game object. So if we look at my text objects, they're called health text and exp text. So that's the name. So health text is what we find. We want to set this equal to a variable name. So we find it. Once we've found it, we want to change the text attribute of this to be what we want it to be. So I have to take that health text and get its text component. Set it equal to health plus health. And this health is the variable that we're creating here. I can do the same thing for my experience text. Once we found our experience text, we do the exact same thing. So exp text dot get component, get its text component, get the text attribute, set it equal to experience plus experience. These are floats. We need to turn them into strings in order to be able to use them. So see how this is an option to string to string. Otherwise, we won't be able to print them, use them in our text object. So this is our whole script right now. We're creating this game object that will live from scene to scene. It's carrying these variables, and when the GUI layer loads in our scenes, it's going to find the text objects that we are using to display our health and experience variables, and we're going to put those numbers into the scene. So this is the complete text. This is the complete script. Once I save this, the next thing we need to do is to take this game controller object, Notice how it has our public variables displaying here. We want to turn it into a prefab so that we can use it in all of our scenes. So I'm going to drag it down to be a prefab. And I'm going to set some initial values in scene 0 to be our health. So I'm going to say we have 10 health and 100 experience. I'm going to save scene 0. I'm going to switch to scene 1. I'm going to bring that game control object into scene number 1. Notice that my health text and my experience text have the same exact name. So we could have brought all of these in as prefabs. I created them individually, but they should be prefabs. Our game controller here, it does not have these initial variables. So in this scene, if we just looked at this scene, we'd have 0 health and 0 experience. But if we bring in our control from scene number 0, then it should bring in that 10 and 100. So I'm going to save that, switch back to scene 0, and I'm going to hit play. When I play, here we have our 10 and 100 displaying. Perfect. I'm going to load the next level, and that 10 and 100 are carried over into scene number 1. The interesting thing here is depending on which scene I start at is where those initial values are set. So if I start at scene number 1, where in the game controller we have 0 and 0, and I hit play, our health and experience are 0 and 0. And if I switch to scene 0, notice the 0, 0 are carried through. So it's taking the control object that's created when we play the very first scene, and it's bringing it into the next scene. And that's how you make a game controller. Now that we have a game controller passing information back and forth between scenes, I want to show you how you can change the values of health and experience on the fly. So I took a minute to create 2 game objects, one of which is a lose health game object and one is a gain health. And I've created a script that is essentially when you click on these, it'll change the values. This could be anything from if you have some collisions between objects, some buttons, a timer, literally anything could be used. I just thought it'd be easiest to create some on-click events. So these are 2 cubes. They have the same script on them. And so let's take a look at what that script is. So I've created this script. It has a public float variable called health adjust, and what it's doing is essentially just when you click on the object, so on mouse down, it finds gamecontrol.control, it takes its health variable, and it adds the health adjust value. So that's all it's doing. So gamecontrol.control is saying, hey, go find that control object and take its health variable and add the number that we've set as health adjust. So this is how you access those variables, and then you just add or subtract from them. If I save this in my Unity, notice how on lose health, I've set this to be -10, and on gain health, I've set it to be +10. So what we would expect is if I click on gain health, which is the top one, I'd add 10 to my health number, and if I click on lose health, I would subtract 10. So if I hit play here, it still has those initial values of 10 and 100. If I click on gain health, health is going up by 10, and if I go down, it's going down by 10. And these values that we're changing here in scene 0, if I load scene number 1, those values that we've set it to, 60, come back. So I can go back and I can say, okay, let's subtract, go to 20, and load 10, that 20 is carried over.